The topic that I'm going to be covering is Islamic law and ethics. So the idea in that is really to um, introduce probably what I think is one of the more important areas of Islamic studies for a number of reasons, not just because it's one of the more drier topics. There's other reasons that make it important as well, such as that everything in your life revolves around it, basically. So from the day-to-day experience of a Muslim, there's questions as to how we're supposed to live our lives and how we understand that. And so we'll be going over that in those sessions. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we need to cover, but basically we're going to deal with um, the. I thought I had it here in one sentence. That's yeah. Some the development of Islamic law and ethics, how it came to be what it is, what are the main sources that led to that development, what are the areas of the content that is going to be covered, what are the reasons for difference of opinion among the scholars, and how do we deal with them, why does that matter today, how does this affect the layperson who's trying to navigate these sources and matters and so on. So all of that stuff we're going to be talking about. We're going to take different case studies in Islamic law that help us to understand how these things are discussed and talked about. So it should be beneficial, inshallah. Although 6 hours is a very, it'll only be 2 hours once a month, right? But we have I have 3 sessions till the end of the year. 6 hours is not really a whole lot. It's pretty, inshallah, we can get through like an introduction. And then my wife will have 2 sessions of hers. Hers will be on 40 hadith on knowledge. And this is basically a collection of statements that the Prophet ﷺ made that she brought together herself on the area of learning and how we should look at learning and understand learning from the perspective of from the Muslim perspective. So she'll be bringing those and commenting on it over the sessions that she has, inshallah. So those are the 2 intensives. I would really encourage people to come if I can make an emotional plea that people do come, not because I'm concerned that I'll come and very few people will show up and it'll be a waste of my time. I don't really look at it that way. Alhamdulillah, just in preparing the material, I've had the opportunity to review some things that I haven't reviewed in the last several years and think about some things in different ways, so I'm happy. But why I think that it's important for people to attend is because the, 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 the going from lecture to lecture and inspiration to inspiration philosophy of experiencing faith, in my opinion, doesn't really work so well over time. And I think it's very, very important to build foundations. And those foundations take a little bit of fatigue. And that's okay. We're willing to fatigue ourselves in a number of other areas, especially when it comes to school. You know, people will go to school, they spend long hours at school, they take notes, they bring the books, they do everything that they need to do. And then when you come to a lecture or a seminar, everyone wants it to be jokes and storytelling and fun. So our deen also has a very rich intellectual history. And I think that it helps us all to have a better understanding of that. So hopefully these sessions will be beneficial for people, inshallah. I encourage you to come out. Yes. The age, I generally don't put age limits. That's, one of, if the person is willing to sit and attempt to pay attention and take notes and try their best, then that's great. Now, that's my, extreme response. But in reality, probably it's going to be challenging for, probably 15 and up. If they're serious, they can handle it. But at the same time, it's worth a try. I try to make it as simple as I can, so it's worth a try. I don't think also that exposure is a bad thing. If people may not understand everything that's covered, but it's not bad for them to be exposed to it. And then if they have questions, we can talk afterwards or whatever it might be. So give it a shot. That's for mine. My wife's, I think, will be a little bit easier. So, can give or take a couple years. But, I don't want to go off on a tangent about the invention of adolescence. So we'll just stop here, and I think we should push ourselves, inshallah. That being said, we'll move to tonight. So I had intended tonight and over the next couple months to introduce on each occasion a figure in Islamic history, mostly more contemporary figures. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me okay in the back? Okay. I don't know if I should be putting it closer or not. It feels like maybe I should. Uh, Relatively contemporary figures, and the idea was not to go into a huge discourse on their lives, but to give a small introduction as to who they were, and then to kind of like bring them onto our radar. And then the idea after that was to focus on a couple of the traits or values that they lived by, and then have us as communities break up into different small groups and talk about those values and traits amongst ourselves. So it requires a little bit of interaction from everyone. But I'm not going to start there tonight. I changed my mind. So we'll start that next time. And just to give you an idea of some of the people I'm thinking about Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, who resisted the French colonization of Algeria. He died in 1883. There's actually a town named after him called Al-Qadir in Iowa. So he's an interesting figure. That didn't. I don't want to give it away, but he's someone that we should know about. Second person that I'm thinking about is Betty Shabazz. Very common in our community to talk about Malcolm X. So I didn't want to do Malcolm X. I wanted to do Betty, just Malcolm's wife, and to talk a little bit about her and who she was and some of the things that she went through, and then take lessons from that. Another figure that I would like us to talk about is Alexander Russell Webb, who was a white American convert during the Victorian age of American history. And then another person I was thinking about was Imam W.D. Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad, who transitioned a large portion of the nation of Islam into Orthodox Islam. He's a very important figure for Islam in America. So inshallah, some of these people will discuss them over time. But before we do that, I want to get into kind of like storytelling and community building as a primer before we do all of that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just share some thoughts on storytelling and community building and why this is important, and then hopefully you guys will agree to speak to one another, and then we can come back and share some reflections and so on, and then we'll close and have the potluck inshallah. So one of the things that we want to think about in storytelling and thinking about our community is that our community is exceptionally diverse. And actually there was a research that came out recently that said that the Muslim community is the second most diverse religious community in the United States. Always whenever we see any sort of research, you have to ask how is this being decided? Right? This is a very important question. How is it being decided who's the most diverse? So I personally think that after looking into that question, we came up as number 2 because of the way that it was decided. So what it was based on 5 ethnicities, and it looked at white, black, or Caucasian, non-Hispanic, black, Hispanic, Asian, and other. So this led to Seventh-day Adventists taking the number 1 spot and the Muslim community taking the number 2 spot. But I think that that's because like half of our community ends up being white when they're not really white. I mean, they kind of are, but they're kind of not. You know, all Arabs fall into white technically on the ethnicity platform. So that's an issue. Then all of the South Asians and East, everyone gets lumped in the Asian side too. So you kind of lose a shot there. So I think we're actually the most diverse, but maybe I'm a little bit biased. It's possible. Nonetheless, we have a very diverse community. That is a strength and that is a weakness. That is a strength because obviously we have a lot of diversity. We have a lot of talent. We have a lot of history. We have a lot of culture. We have a lot of tradition. All kinds of experiences and things that our community brings to the table, which is amazingly it's brilliant. It's amazing. I remember that one of the things that really struck me when I first came into Islam was this scene in a masjid in San Diego where I came in and I saw all these people who were all different colors and so on, and they were all sitting in the musalla, and they were all speaking to each other in Arabic. And that just blew my mind. I was thinking, how are all these people speaking a different language than English in this same place? And so we're very diverse, but at the same time, that brings a lot of difficulties, right? Because everybody's accustomed to doing things in the way that they're accustomed to doing it, and that may be different than the way that other people are accustomed to doing it. So I'll give you a very interesting example that happened to me when I was in Egypt. There was, alhamdulillah, a lot of students from the U.S. studying in Egypt. Well, after we were there for a number of years, then there were a lot of students from the U.S. studying in Egypt. Among these were two that were close to me. One of them was Arab of a Palestinian background, and one of them was Pakistani. Okay? So one thing that you know, what we probably people know about Arabs, so Arabs are very lively people. And it's a beautiful thing. You know, I was telling my wife the other day, I miss Egypt because I miss that lively, just like everyone talking to each other, people are having a good time. It's very bubbly, you know, especially Egypt. And so I went to a restaurant in Anaheim, and the lady, like, she took our son and was showing him different things. She showed him how they cook the food and, like, all these different things. It was awesome. But that's not really South Asian culture, okay? So the other brother who was with us, Pakistani, very stoic. You know, even it happens in masajid. Depending on which masjid you go to, sometimes you get an audience that doesn't flinch, and sometimes you get an audience that really gives you feedback, right? So this brother's very stoic, this brother's very animated, right? And the Palestinian brother would come to me every now and then. He'd be like, you know, I need your advice. I say, what's going on? He's like, so-and-so, I don't think he likes me. I think there's an issue between us. I keep trying to reach out to him. He doesn't say much. He doesn't want to connect and like all these things. I'm telling him, no, this brother loves you. He just doesn't communicate the same way that you communicate. And if you expect him to deal with you the way that you're dealing with him, you're never going to get along because it's just not the way he does things. Right? These are totally different cultural habits in terms of communication. Now, that can also, in this way, it's very small, right? But in other ways, it can get very serious. Like certain cultures are going to raise their voices faster than others. And raising your voice in certain cultures is more serious than others, right? So all of these type of things lead to differences that we have to eventually get over. We have to figure out how we're going to deal with it. And then you bring all of that into here. And the United States has its own particular culture, and Southern California has its own particular culture. And the challenges that young people face here are their own challenges, right? So we're trying to get through all of these things. And in all of that, storytelling is really important. The trouble, again, is that some of us just don't like to talk. And if we do talk, we just don't like to talk about ourselves. We don't like to tell people about our families or ourselves or anything else. And the difficulty is, if you don't give a little bit, it's very tough to actually get to know each other on a deeper level. If you don't know each other on a deeper level, it's very tough to have any sort of serious community. There's a statement of Imam al-Sha'bi, who was one of the early scholars of Islam. He was one of the teachers of Abu Hanifa. And he was asked, you know, he talked to someone one time. He said, do you know so-and-so? He's like, yeah, I know him by face, but I don't know him by name. He said, this is the brotherhood of the foolish. It's the brotherhood of the foolish. You only know the person by their name, or the sisterhood of the foolish. You don't know their name, you only know their face. So the idea here is, even if you know someone's face, you might know their name, but do you know anything about them? If we don't know anything about each other, it's very hard to build community. Okay, so storytelling very much helps in this regard. And knowing the stories of people helps in this regard. Being in the position that I was as an imam exposed me to this a lot more than I think the average person, because people generally tend to tell you their stories more than they tell average people because they're trying to talk to you about whatever. And I just want to give an example of this. It's possible that someone could look at this as a praise of myself. It's actually a degradation of myself. So make sure you read it in the right way. I'm upset at myself in this case, not happy about what the brother said. All right. So there was a brother that I met in a place, and I used to get very frustrated with this brother. Okay, and that was because he was very persistent and not always the softest in his persistence. Okay, so he wants something to get done. He is going to figure out how it gets done. He asks you and you say, no, you can't do it. He's going to ask someone else. They say, no, you can't do it. He's going to go to someone else. He's going to say, no, you can't do it. Then he gets to like, okay, if they all said no, then I'm going to break it into pieces. Then now that I have it into pieces, I'm going to go to this person with this piece and try to get it together so that I can eventually, he's doing whatever he can to get what he wants to get, right? First of all, many of us that grow up here, we don't understand that because our life has been too easy. And we have systems that work for the most part. But if you live in places where systems don't work, you understand how people get to that point. They get to that point because it doesn't work. And unless you do everything you can possibly do, it doesn't happen. So he learned that because he grew up in a tough environment, right? And I used to get upset with him, he's being really rough, he's doing this, he's doing that, whatever. Then I talked to him a little. He came to me one time to talk to me about a family situation. Then I calmed down a little bit. He said, I came from so-and-so. One of my sons is with me, but two of my sons are stuck there. I can't go back to them, and I don't know what I should do here. Should I stay here? Should I go to another country? But if I go to that country, I don't know how long I'll be able to stay there, and then I'll get kicked out. I said, what about your home country? He said, if I go to my home country and I come to the border, they're going to kill me. Straight up. So I was like, all right, let me look at the situation a little bit differently, right? More time passes. Deal with the brother, talking to him, so on. He comes to me one day, he says, Imam, I want to ask you a question. I said, okay. He said, it's a serious question. I was like, okay. He said, can you ask people in this life that you think are better than you? Can you ask them to promise you that if they get to paradise in the next life, they'll look for you? SubhanAllah, this is like a very interesting question, right? I said, I never really thought about it, but there's this concept of, the Prophet ﷺ taught us that the person will be with the one that they love. And there's this story of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and a man came to him and he told him, Ya Rasulullah, I love you so much, but you're the messenger of God. And when we get to paradise, you're going to be in the highest parts of paradise, and I'm just like this lowly believer, but I want to be with you. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, told him that the person will be with the one that they love. And I started talking about these different things with him, but I was like, but specifically to your question, he's like, yeah, but, and he's very persistent, right? So he says, no, but I'm asking you, while you are alive, can you go to the person and ask them that they will promise to go and look for you when they get into paradise and they're at a higher level than you? I was like, it seems plausible, right? I said, it seems plausible that that's something that you could do. And then you know where he's going with this, right? So before he starts to say anything, I grabbed him and I was like, brother, when you get there, inshallah, can you come look for me? Right? So that he got very serious and he's like, no. He's like, not no as in no, but he's like, no. I'm asking you because I want you to come look for me. Can you promise me that you're going to go look for me? Right? Now, like I said, this is not about me in a good way. This is about me in a bad way. You guys understand what I'm saying? When I first dealt with this brother, I was losing patience with the brother. I don't understand. Why is he being so rude? Why is he being so crass? Why is he talking to me this way? Why is he going around this? Why is he doing that? Why is he doing all these things? In the end, that brother is much better than I am. But I didn't know him. Now that I know him a little bit, I feel much differently about him. If we don't know each other, we can't get over the things that are necessarily going to happen in a community of people. Dr. Jackson asks an interesting question sometimes. Dr. Jackson at USC, he says, the way that modern society is it even possible for us to have community anymore? Or do we just not even have that capacity? Because when I want to buy something, what am I going to do? First of all, I'm going to get Amazon Prime for my backup. Then I'm going to go to Amazon, I'm going to look up what I want to buy. I'm going to find 15 options. All of them are going to have 200 reviews. I'm going to compare the reviews. I'm going to order what I want. It's going to come in 2 days if it's the bad one. If it's going to come in 1 day if I have special, depending on where it's coming from and so on. If I like it, I keep it. If I don't like it, I write a bad review and I send it back. Okay? How do you do that in a community? You think in a community everything's going to go your way? I think it's going to be like every time I come in the doors, I'm going to feel like I'm on top of the world and everyone's going to grab me and hug me and we're all going to agree and like sing happy songs all the time. It doesn't always work that way, right? Sometimes it's like family. You still stick with family when you don't like them, right? Think about this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It just blows my mind. He said, you talk about Silatul Rahim, the one that brings the relationships of the family together. He says, the one who brings the family relationships together is not the one who deals with the people they get along with. Al-wasilu man wasala alladhi qata'a. The wasil, the one that connects the family relations, is the one who reaches out to the family member who cut them off and doesn't let them get away with cutting them off. Right? Think about that concept and what that requires as a community of people or as a family of people. This is a community as a family. You have to know each other like that. If I know you, I can forgive you for that thing that you did that I really didn't like because I know you. Right? I can humanize you at that level. So one of the ways to get over our differences, one of the ways to break our community stronger is to be able to tell these stories to each other. There's a brother who's very close with me. I'm going to wrap this up so we can do it with each other. There's a brother who's really close to me, but I'm trying to model the storytelling thing for you without telling you. I was going to tell you at the end, but I'll tell you now to keep you patient. There's a brother who I know very well. He's a convert from, his family is Sikh. Okay? Some of you may know that in some circles of the Sikh religion, they're extremely anti-Muslim. So it turns out that this brother's family is extremely anti-Muslim. Right? He's raised here, everything else, but very, very anti-Muslim family. And he eventually decides that he wants to become a Muslim. And he spent 4 or 5 years, his family not knowing that he was a Muslim. He was hiding it from his family while living at home. Okay, imagine the difficulty of this. He told this story at a camp that I was in because his group in the camp, they did a skit called How I Met My Mother. I guess there's some show, How I Met Your Mother or something. People are nodding. I'll take that as a yes. So they did this skit called How I Met My Mother. And basically these kids would come and they would tell a story of something meaningful that happened to them with their mother. And in the background, the other kids in the group, they would kind of act out the story. It was a really cool idea that they did in their skit. And when it came to be his turn, he told the story of when he told his family that he was a Muslim and how he got kicked out of his home and who it was that picked him up from his house when he got kicked out of his home and what his mother said to him at that moment when they were at the door and how he responded to her and what was going on with his father. And I mean, it was like very, very powerful, right? And the person who was running the camp came up afterwards and he's like, that was a really tough thing to listen to, but it was very moving. And then this person who got kicked out of his home, he said, and you were the one who was there to pick me up that day. Right? Like you feel this really tight relationship. And the person the one who's running the camp, he says, yes, it was tough for that and for other reasons. All the people in the camp don't know because they don't know him, right? That his mother died when he was very young. So this story of this, all of this stuff makes very, very tight relationships. And so all of us actually have stories. They don't have to be the most incredible, groundbreaking, make them into Hollywood movies stories. But we all have stories. We have stories that are meaningful to us individually. We have stories that are meaningful to us as families. There's research that shows that families that know the stories of their own history the kids have higher resilience than families that don't. So if the child is growing up hearing about how, so for example, like in my house, I grew up hearing the story about how my dad came to the country when he was 18 and all he had was like the comb in his pocket and a razor in his hand and an address of someone's house he was supposed to go to. Right? That's a real story. The real story is I had an address, I landed in Tulsa, and I had an address of a home that I was supposed to go to. So what'd you do? He's like, so I went to the home. What else was I going to do? I'm in America, I don't know anybody. I have no money. What do you do? Just go to the home. I said, so what happened? He said, I went to the home and nobody was there. So what do you do when you go to the home and nobody's there? It's like I sat down on the porch and I took a nap. What am I going to do? I waited for them to come home. I figured it out. Well, what did you do in the summer times when you were off from school and the college break and so on? He's like, well, there's no work in Oklahoma. She used to catch buses to Chicago and walk from factory to factory until we could find work, make a few bucks so we can go home, go back in the school year and go to school. You know, you hear when you hear this kind of stuff, it makes you look at your struggles in a different way. It's very, this is like my family history. I know where I came from. I know what my people have been through. I know. So imagine now, then when we go back to the diversity of the community being a positive, the diversity of the community can be a positive if we're able to crowdsource those experiences. So now it's not just your family, it's your entire community family. So I know like so-and-so had this happen to them and their uncles and their relatives and so on, and we all draw strength from that. And we see the way that people live and persevere and have resilience through all of that and so on. So what do we want to do? We want to break into groups. Your group cannot be bigger than 3 people. 2 people or 3 people groups. You can go with whoever you want, but I would encourage us to have a little bit of, go to someone you know less well. Don't go to the person you've known them for the last 20 years, if that's possible. I know this is a community of people that grew up together. But if you can go to someone who you haven't known for 20 years, it would be positive. And each person share with the other person a story that is important to them or their family. It could be a story of like how you came into caring about faith. It could be a story about how someone came to this country. It could be a story of something funny that happened to you. It could be a story of something tragic that happened to you. It could be anything you want. Just choose it and then tell it to each other, talk to each other a little bit, and then we'll come back after like maybe 10 minutes, depending on, I'll be watching you guys to see how it goes. And we'll come back and maybe some people will be willing to share those stories and we can all benefit from it. And then we'll kind of wrap up and get ready for next month. We'll go to the potluck, inshallah. So, do you agree? It doesn't really matter if you agree because you have to do it anyways. Forcing it on you. Just to give you, if people are a little bit nervous about this, I've done this in 2 different communities now. And both those communities, they were a little bit shy when people first started talking to each other. But after that, like I couldn't pry them apart. So just, give it a shot and put yourself out there a little bit. Inshallah, your brother or sister will meet you there. So let's break off, and then we'll come back to it, and I'll tell you guys a couple more stories that I heard, and we'll conclude, inshallah. Okay, go ahead. Bismillah. If we can just come together and wrap it up, and we can continue at the potluck time, inshallah. Okay. Let's give it a... All right. So is there anyone who feels very inspired to share something from... If you're going to share a story, try to... I won't say that. If is there anyone who's inspired to kind of share something from their own story that they think will be beneficial to others, or something that they heard from someone they were talking to, but get their permission first. Okay, al-majalis bil amana. If you heard something in the conversation with the person, should respect their privacy in that, and don't tell it unless they give you permission to. Okay? So, anyone have anything they want to share? Oh, I'm sure you guys had like really amazing stories. Yeah, I could hear your... If he wants to, he can. Okay. Anyone? That's fine. If you want to keep them to yourselves, that's fine. Bismillah. Bismillah.
So brother Abu Sharif, or brother Ashraf, he came to the United States for the purpose of study, and he didn't know any English at that time. And he went to the Masjid of Vermont, right? And he happened to talk to one of the brothers, and he said, what should I do? In Arabic, of course. And he said, just go and tell them I want to study English. I want to study English. In a school. So, or in a school, right? Okay. So I went there, he didn't have any English at all. He struggled with the guy with his first name, last name. He didn't know what first name is or last name is. So he gave him that, and alhamdulillah, everything was fine. Until they got to the date of birth. So he was trying, to tell him what's the date of birth. So he was trying date of birth, month, day. It didn't work with him. So it started, happy birthday to you. This is the story he shared. So I think there is a wisdom here.
That's good. That's good. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you. Thank you. SubhanAllah. Anyone here, by the way, from the special group of people who have more than one birthday? Some of the older people, usually some of the uncles and aunties have more than one birthday. My dad's from the multiple birthday camp. That's why I'm asking. He has a birthday in May and a birthday in February, depending on which agency you ask. Okay. Anyone else have a story or anything? If he wants to, he can say it. If not, we're going to leave him alone. Okay? Which ones? Yeah, I know that. Okay, that's fine. I'll leave you alone. You don't have to tell stories. Last time I did this, by the way, I'll just tell you the story of the brother. The brother told the story of how he escaped from slavery. It's an African American brother, and then everyone was looking and they were thinking, but slavery was abolished when you were a kid, right? Like slavery didn't technically exist in the South anymore when you were a kid, so how is it that you're telling us a story that you escaped from slavery? So then it was a very traumatic story. But so then we had to basically explain to people that what are you when you're not getting paid and you can't afford to move and you have no communication to anyone else and you have no agency over yourself or your property and you have no way of getting out of where you are. And so what are you basically? He's like, you're basically a slave. And then he had to leave the room because he was crying. And he was like a huge brother, mashallah. Really, really big. So it was very touching. I'll tell you one story and then we'll break so we can have the potluck and we'll finish. This is the story that kind of got me going on this topic. There was two brothers I was speaking to, young brothers, and we were talking about this idea, and then one of them told me this story. And so I'll leave you with this one, as long as the parents promise not to abuse the story. Okay? It's very, very important not to use Islam to control people unnecessarily. Right? Don't abuse Islam in order to control people. It's a very bad thing. So don't abuse the story in order to control your kids. All right? I'm just telling you now. Because this story could very easily be abused to control your kids. So the story was the brother, his family was from India. And they were from India in the time of the partition. So for people who lived through this India-Pakistan partition, or people who are familiar with it at some level, it was a very, there was a lot of people who died in this process, as well as the whole Bangladesh situation that occurred. A lot of people died. And this brother's family was in India. His grandfather wanted to take the family to Pakistan. And the grandfather had with him his disabled wife, I believe she was disabled, and his mother who was very old, and his kids. And eventually he convinced them that we need to leave and we need to go to this train station. We do it right. And finally he got them to the train station. When they got to the train station, his mother, she looked at the train and she said, "I'm not getting on that thing." Right? Because now this is this brother's grandfather's mother. So it's his great grandmother. You can imagine this is a woman who's from a village. She's never seen a train in her life. Right? All she knows is villages and animals and fields. And a train is, it's kind of like when we were in Egypt and you would see sometimes people from the country in the airport dealing with an escalator for the first time. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this. It's fascinating to watch. People who have never dealt with an escalator, and they come to the escalator and they like don't know how they're supposed to get on it, and they get on it, they start laughing, and like it's just it's an amazing thing to watch, subhanallah. But this woman, she looked at the train and she was like, there's no way I'm getting on that thing. That thing moves human beings. I'm not getting on that. And she refused. And so you can imagine this brother now, like you're in the partition period. This is the last train that's supposed to go from his area to Pakistan. You finally get your mother there and your wife and your kids and like your family's moving to this new place. And your mother's elderly and she's sitting there and she's like, I'm not getting on the train. So the brother, this grandfather, he said he sat and he thought about it for a while. And he decided that my mother doesn't want to get on the train. I can't force my mother to get on the train. Just can't, you know. And so they didn't. They went back home, or they were in the station. They didn't get on the train. And some period of time passed, and the train came back. And the train left full, but the train came back empty. And probably people who are familiar with this story know already what happened. The train didn't come back empty because everyone got off the train. The train came back empty because the train was ambushed and everybody on the train was killed. So the train came back. And the brother's sitting there still with his mother and his wife and his kids, right? So this brother is telling me this story, this about his grandfather, right? And he's reflecting upon his grandfather's life and the things that he's facing in his life and how he needs to be patient with them and so on. And really it's just a reminder to know that these stories they may be tough, but they're real. And it's important for us to not just forget stories that are real, even if they're tough, because they give us the strength that we need. And they help us to understand each other. And subhanAllah, I told this story way far away from where the brother who told it to me was. And I told it in the masjid in this other place. And this brother raised his hand after the session where they broke off and everything else. He raised his hand and he said, you know that story that you told? I just realized right now that that's a story about my grandfather and I didn't even know that story before. Right? This is his own he's not saying that like analogy. That was actually his grandfather. The two kids had the same grandfather. They're relatives in different cities. He heard the story and he recognized that, wait a second, that's my family. And then he was hearing that story and it kind of like inspired him to deal with the things that he was dealing with in his own life. So to wrap it up, storytelling, you know, it doesn't always have to be traumatic. It can be funny. I'm just not really so funny. So this tends to be more trauma oriented. I apologize. But you can, any type of story. But knowing each other's stories really will help us to get along with each other better and to have more compassion with one another and more understanding for one another, which I believe is at the center of the prophetic mission. That the Prophet ﷺ before and above anything else was the Prophet of mercy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when He created everything, سَبَقَتْ رَحْمَتِي غَضَبِي, that my mercy has overcome my wrath. Or in another narration, غَلَبَتْ رَحْمَتِي غَضَبِي, that it's larger than my wrath. That mercy is the core of the message of Islam. And when we understand each other better, we can have more mercy with one another. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us and to forgive us and bring us close to one another and to give us deep understanding of the faith, inshallah. Ameen. And hopefully we'll see some of you guys tomorrow morning, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Do you want me to give... I think food is upstairs. I'm sure you guys already know and understand what to do, so I don't have to worry about it. Food is upstairs. Have fun. Inshallah, we'll see you. Assalamu alaikum.